Freddie Mercury said, "Write me things. I know I don't have much time. Keep writing words to me. Keep giving me things. I will sing them. And then you will do what you like with them. You will finish them." Brian May heard this instruction in the early months of 1991. It was not a request. It was not a suggestion. It was a commission, the specific kind of instruction that a person gives when they understand that the time for ordinary creative process is over. And what is required is something more direct. Freddie Mercury was going to die. He knew he was going to die. And what he wanted to do in the time that remained was to sing, not to rest, not to manage the decline. To come into the studio on the days when his body allowed it, and to sing whatever Brian May had written in whatever state he was in when he arrived, and to leave the finishing to the people who would still be alive to finish it. Brian May wrote. Freddie Mercury sang. He sang until he could not. And Brian May spent the next 4 years finishing what had been left for him to finish building, from the fragments of a voice recorded in the shadow of death, the album that became Made in Heaven. This is the story of what it took to make it, and of what it cost. The instruction Freddie Mercury gave to Brian May in 1991 was unusual in the history of the band's creative process in a specific and important way. Queen's standard method of working, the method they had used across every album since the beginning, was that Freddie Mercury did not sing his final vocal until the music was completely finished. He was precise and demanding about the backing track before he would commit to the vocal. The arrangement had to be right, the instrumentation had to be right, the structure had to be resolved. He would not sing a definitive vocal on a work in progress. This discipline was not fussiness, it was the working method of someone who understood that the relationship between the voice and the music around it was not separable, that the vocal existed in a specific sonic environment and had to be made in full knowledge of what that environment was going to be. In 1991, he changed this completely. He came to the Mountain Studios in Montreux and sang vocals over incomplete music, over bare backing tracks, over things that had not yet been resolved. Not because his standards had dropped, because the order of priorities had changed. The voice was the thing that could not be replaced. The instrumentation could be finished later. The voice had to happen now. Roger Taylor has described the 1991 Made in Heaven sessions in terms that illuminate the specific quality of what was happening in Mountain Studios during those months. He said the sicker he felt, the more it seemed like he needed to record. To give himself something to do, some reason to continue, he came when he could. This is not the account of a man diminishing, it is the account of a man directing. Freddie Mercury's relationship with the studio in 1991 was not passive. He was not being accommodated or managed. He was making decisions. He was determining what would be recorded, what he would and would not sing, how the sessions would be structured around the unpredictable schedule of his body. There were days when he could not come, and on the days he could, he came. He prepared. He stood at the microphone. He sang with a specific concentration that people who were present in those sessions have described as something they had never seen from him before, not better exactly than what he brought to other sessions, but different, more stripped of everything that was not the singing, more completely itself. The sicker he felt, the more it seemed like he needed to record. Think about what that sentence contains. Not, despite his illness, he continued to work. Not, he pushed through. The more he was diminished, the more he needed the studio. The studio was the place where the diminishment stopped mattering, where what he could do was still fully itself, regardless of what his body was doing to everything else. He understood this. He managed his time accordingly. He came when he could. He sang everything that was put in front of him. He left the rest for the people who would still be here. The specific recordings that formed the core of the Made in Heaven sessions in 1991 were primarily three. A Winter's Tale, which Freddie Mercury recorded after the engineer arrived to find him alone in the studio, having turned up while David Richards was out sick. Mother Love, the last song he and Brian May wrote together, and You Don't Fool Me, which emerged from a live jam that was later expanded. A Winter's Tale is Freddie Mercury looking out of the window of the Mountain Studios at the view over Lake Geneva, describing what he saw, the colors and the cold and the stillness of the Swiss winter landscape. and setting it to music with the specific quality of someone who understands they are describing something for the last time. The engineer who was there described Freddie Mercury arriving at the studio, finding himself alone with the equipment, and simply beginning to record the spontaneous act of a man for whom the music was more natural than any other form of existing. He did not wait for the session to be formally convened. He sang what he could see out the window. The quality of that recording, a voice describing a specific view on a specific morning, with no accompanying consciousness that this was one of the last things it would do, is audible in the recording. You can hear it. Mother Love was the last song Freddie Mercury recorded. It was also the last song he and Brian May wrote together. Brian May has described the writing of it with a quality of care that goes beyond the ordinary description of a creative collaboration. They wrote it together in the awareness that it was one of the last things they would write together, that the window was very close to closing. The song is about need, about the specific human need for comfort, for something unconditional, for the kind of love that does not require justification or explanation. In May 1991, Freddie Mercury recorded the vocals for Mother Love in a state of significant physical difficulty. He sang as much as he could, and then he said to Brian May, "Oh, Brian, I can't do anything else." He could not finish the last verse. He went home. Brian May finished the last verse himself. His voice completes Mother Love, a song written by both of them, begun by Freddie Mercury, and finished after the beginning of the end by the person who had written the words. The specific moment in the recording where the voice changes, where Freddie Mercury's last vocal performance ends and Brian May's voice takes over, is one of the most quietly devastating moments in the Queen catalog. You can hear it if you know what you are listening for. Freddie Mercury knew what he was doing. He knew it in the specific and literal sense. He understood that he was making material for an album that he would not live to complete, for an audience he would not live to hear receive it. And he managed this knowledge in the same way he managed everything else that the illness required him to manage, with a quality of practical efficiency that the people around him have described, consistently and across many accounts, as extraordinary. He did not make the dying the subject of the sessions. He made the music the subject of the sessions. He did not talk about what would happen after he was gone. He talked about the songs. He said, "Give me more songs." He said, "I will sing them." He said, "You will finish them." And then he sang, and he left. And the finishing was done by the three people who remained, Brian May and Roger Taylor and John Deacon, across a process that took nearly 4 years and that produced in 1995 the album that Freddie Mercury had known was being built while he was dying. He did not make the dying the subject. He made the music the subject. This is not denial. This is the specific and deliberate act of a man who understands what he has and what he has left, and who decides very clearly what each of those things is for. The dying was for enduring. The music was for making. He kept them separate. The music benefited from the separation. After Freddie Mercury died in November 1991, the three remaining members did not immediately go back to the tapes. They grieved. It was not until late 1993 that Roger Taylor and John Deacon began going through the archive sessions. Brian May, still on tour with his solo album, heard what they were doing and came back. He felt they were not on the right path. They needed to start again. Together, they started again. They built carefully, using every fragment of vocal that could be used, recordings from as far back as 1980, assembled with the 1991 sessions into a record that spanned 15 years of Freddie Mercury's voice and ended with the voice at its most raw and its most present. Made in Heaven, released in November 1995, is structured as a kind of journey from It's a Beautiful Day, a spontaneous piano improvisation that Freddie Mercury recorded alone in Munich in 1980, at a moment of particular happiness through the songs written and recorded specifically for the album in 1991, to the end of Mother Love and the brief, floating, almost wordless final track. The album is not uniformly excellent. Some of its tracks were assembled from older material that was reworked to fit the project. But the core of it, A Winter's Tale, Mother Love, the 1991 recordings, has a specific quality that is impossible to manufacture and impossible to replicate. It is the quality of a voice that knows it is making something final, without performing the finality, without allowing the awareness of the end to become the subject. Freddie Mercury, in the 1991 recordings, sang as if the music was the only thing in the room. The illness, the dying, the specific knowledge of what was happening, none of it appears in the voice. The voice is completely itself. What it knew is not in the sound. It is in the space between the sounds. And that is exactly where he put it. The album cover of Made in Heaven is a photograph taken in Montreux. In the foreground, facing away from the camera, looking out over Lake Geneva, Brian May, Roger Taylor, and John Deacon. Their backs to us, their faces turned toward the lake. In the distance across the water, the statue of Freddie Mercury facing toward them. The statue, unveiled in November 1996, was created by sculptor Irina Sedleka from a photograph. It shows Freddie Mercury in performance mode, arm raised, the specific posture of a man at the front of a stage. The three surviving members of Queen stand on the shore with their backs to the camera, looking at the statue of the fourth. The composition is the meaning, the three of them facing him. The album they are standing in front of, the thing they made from what he left, the lake between them and the statue, the distance between the living and the finished. Brian May, Roger Taylor, John Deacon, backs to the camera, looking at Freddie Mercury's statue across the lake. This is the album cover of the last record they made together. Think about what it means to stand there, to have made that album from those fragments, to look at the statue and know what it cost, and to have released it as a gift to the world rather than keeping the cost to themselves. Made in Heaven was the last album John Deacon made as a member of Queen. After its release in the 1997 Brit Awards performance, the last time all three surviving members appeared together, John Deacon withdrew completely. He has not recorded or performed publicly since. The reason he has given is few and quiet. Queen was Freddie Mercury. Without Freddie Mercury, there was no reason to continue. John Deacon built his bass lines for the Made in Heaven sessions, knowing they were the last ones. The album is the last music he ever made in public, and then he was gone as completely as Freddie Mercury was gone, though in a different and quieter way. Made in Heaven debuted at #1 in the UK and nearly a dozen other countries, selling approximately 20 million copies worldwide. But what it gave was not captured by the numbers. What it gave was a completion, not of Freddie Mercury's life, which had been completed in November 1991 in a way no album could revise, but of the arc of his voice. From the first rough recordings at Trident Studios in 1973 to the view out of the Mountain Studios window in autumn 1991, a voice describing a beautiful day, a winter landscape, a love that needed no explanation. It gave the three men who made it a reason to go into the studio. It gave everyone who heard it the specific, irreplaceable experience of hearing Freddie Mercury's voice, knowing what it knew, and singing anyway. He said, "Write me things." He said, "I will sing them." He said, "You will finish them." Brian May wrote. Freddie Mercury sang. Brian May finished. The album that resulted has sold 20 million copies. The voice on it is the voice of a man who gave Brian May an instruction and then kept the instruction until he could not keep it anymore, and then left the rest to the people who could. That is the whole of what Made in Heaven is, an instruction kept. And what was made from keeping it. Made in Heaven was released on the 6th of November, 1995, 4 years after Freddie Mercury died. The last track on the album, after Mother Love, and after the final verse Brian May sang because Freddie Mercury could not, is a nearly 23-minute ambient piece built from fragments of his voice and studio sounds. It was built overnight while the album was being mastered. They did not plan it. They made it because it felt necessary, because the album needed something at the end that was simply the texture of a voice that was no longer making music, but was still, somehow, present. Freddie Mercury said, "Write me things." He said, "I will sing them." He said, "You will finish them." Brian May finished. The last thing on the album is the voice, Anna, fading. Still there, then not.